Welcome everyone to Connected Learning TV. Believe it or not, this is the 28th webinar in our series. To date, our webinar content has been viewed in over 90 countries. This is pretty amazing. And we've enjoyed seeing such a diverse community develop over these past several months, and we look forward to it continuing to grow over the next several months. If you'd like to check out any of the previous sessions, you can visit the webinar archive on www.connectedlearning.tv. Just a couple of notes to those of you who may be watching on live stream. We encourage you to use the chat stream to introduce yourselves, connect with each other, share resources, and pose questions for those here in the Google Plus Hangout, who you'll be meeting shortly. The URL for our public group notes, Google Doc for today, should be included in that live stream chat, and we welcome your assistance in capturing highlights and sharing resources related to today's topic. So before we get started, I'd like to introduce our guest for today, Kylie Peppler, who is an assistant professor in the Learning Sciences program at Indiana University of Bloomington. The National Science Foundation, as well as the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, support Kelly's current work on creativity, systems thinking, and media arts in youth communities. Her collaborative investigations into e-textiles have led to new educational approaches to electronic textile design that really push back on traditional notions of arts education. So we're extremely excited to have Kylie here with us today and learning more about her work and its implications for how we think about K-12 education, as well as the kind of after-school learning spaces and just the wealth of opportunities that are emerging as we begin to think about 21st century learning and 21st century literacies. Before Kylie begins with a brief presentation that will kind of showcase some of her work and highlight some key ideas and concepts that we might address today, I'd like for the members in our Google Hangout to introduce themselves real quickly, just so that those who are watching have a sense of who's gathered here today in the Google Plus Hangout. And maybe we can start with Christina and then work our way across our Hangout list.
Sure. Thank you, Craig, and thank you, Kylie, for inviting me here. My name is Christina Cantrell. I'm a Senior Program Associate at the National Writing Project, and I direct our Digital Is program, which is funded by the MacArthur Foundation Digital Media and Learning work. The National Writing Project is a peer-based network of educators. I think we're about 38 years old now. And we work with educators, kindergarten through university, and also across the disciplines, and focus on literacy learning primarily. We've been recently working with Kylie and some other partners on a project called Grinding New Lenses. Several teachers from across the country have been involved in that work. And now we're working on a new curriculum series that's emerged from that work and was co-developed through that work called Understanding Systems. And Kylie will probably talk a little bit more about that too. But that's my connection here, and I'm really excited to be here. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and glad that this has been arranged to talk about a really exciting and emerging topic to do with e-textiles and programming language and that kind of thing. So I'm Michelle Noble. I'm a professor of literacy education at Montclair State University, and my research area is new literacies. So I'm very much interested in how young kids, in particular outside school, are taking up the digital media and doing things that we've really never seen before, whether it's, you know, the blogging through to anime music videos and the whole DIY culture and how they're tapping into online expertise and distributed knowledge and that kind of thing. And then I'm especially interested in the e-textiles in terms of how they really blur that divide between digital and analog, and how they engage kids in programming languages which help them to really construct things for themselves rather than consuming a lot of products and simply moving them around to create new things. So that's my area, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion.
Sam?
Great, thanks. So I am youth program developer at the Chicago Community Trust, funded by MacArthur, and working on an exciting project called Hive Fashion, which is a partnership with the Hive Learning Networks in Chicago and New York City. The goal of the 2-year program is to support the development by Hive organizations of youth programming related to creative production and fashion and multimedia narration of the learning that happens through that creative production. We believe that there is real transformative learning potential in the challenge of bringing creative ideas to life, and we want to extend that challenge to the youth who are engaged in the Hive through the 30 or 40 or so organizations that are members of the Hive in each city.
Okay.
Hi, am I on now?
Yes.
My name is Yasmin Kafai. I'm here at the University of Philadelphia, at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia at the Graduate School of Education, and I'm also in computer science. And my connection to electronic textiles has been examining on how these materials can kind of be used to broaden and revitalize computer science education. So actually with Kylie, we have been working for the last 3 years on examining learning and teaching with electronic textiles, and I have also extended this now to work with Brian Brayboy at American Indian Education, combining indigenous and new crafts together. And I'm also looking at how we can kind of build hybrid communities that bring together online connections with local neighborhoods efforts in using crafts like electronic textiles to bring youth, elders, and all kinds of groups together in learning and working with technologies.
Okay, fantastic, and thank each of you for those introductions, and as is clearly evident, a really nice group here with diverse interests, but also intersecting interests, and looking forward to a wonderful conversation here today. So I guess we'll turn it over to our guest. Kylie, would you like to begin us with your presentation?
Sure. Well, thank you, Craig, and thank you, all of you, for joining. This is going to be a fabulous conversation. So I've brought a couple slides with me today that I'd like to share to kind of get the conversation going, and hopefully we've got some people there streaming this that are sort of new to the e-textiles landscape. So how's this? Okay. Great. So the title of my talk here today is Learning by Doing and Making in High-Tech Textile Design. And so in my research, I've been really interested in looking at what youth are learning through e-textiles, particularly as it ties to artistic expression. And so what might youth be taking away from that experience, and how can we get them in touch with professional practice? And so until lately, a lot of these materials that we're going to be talking about today have been in the exclusive domain of professional designers and artists and engineers. And one of the first kits to kind of become part of the more public landscape, and a lot of DIY enthusiasts and adults and children alike are kind of taking part in, is the lily pad Arduino. And that's been sort of central to my work and much of the work that you're going to hear about today. It was created by Leah Buechley, and it's been only on the market for the past, probably 5 to 7 years or so, but there's been this flurry of activity that's been really fun to follow, and we'll probably talk a lot more about that today. But it's been particularly this wonderful intersection of what you can see here, this conductive thread, of textiles and fashion, but also you can see the technology pieces here. And so you can see a little lily pad Arduino, which is like a little wearable computer. You've got these LEDs that you can embed in your clothing. You've got a Vibe board, different kinds of sensors and push buttons and things like that. And so that's just a close look at the materials that we'll be talking about. Like I said, I'm really interested in sort of what the professionals have been using these materials for. And so you can see here, you can see Lady Gaga's costumes. You can see, for those of you that tune into the Super Bowl, the halftime show. A lot of people that have taken this down the runway. And so e-textiles are starting to become a part of our everyday reality, and certainly part of sort of the high end of fashion and entertainment today. And so it's just really, really exciting. So as we bring this down and we're working with youth, a lot of the times we get started and I try to explain the materials in a way that they can start to understand. And so instead of wire, the youth are using conductive thread here. And so you can see here that it's actually got a lot of the same properties that regular thread would have. And so this is a small child threading this needle here and getting ready to get started. And so I think a lot of times when we talk about e-textiles, it sounds like we're just going to have the electronics just stuck to our clothing. And in reality, it's much more integrated thanks to these kits that Leah's designed. So this is another young girl that's started with her workshop. She's actually creating an electronic cuff or bracelet here. And so you can see, she's just integrating typical crafting materials. This is felt and beads, and using her scissors. And you can see a little part of this electronic Velcro. So it's not just, conductive Velcro. So it's not just conductive thread. There's a whole host of everyday crafting materials that are conductive. And you can even find more. You can find, beads at your local store that would be conductive as well. And so as the youth are getting started on this project, this is a young girl that's getting started with her first e-textile shirt. And so she's put the lily pad Arduino here, and she's sewn these conductive lines to her LED. And so you can see the process here of kind of what she needs to do. So you can see that you're going to have to learn how to sew in your typical format. You're going to need to learn how to tie knots, and all of the traditional crafting actually comes into play here. And in addition, you're going to have to also learn a little bit about electronics. And so you can see a little negative symbol and these other things here. So the child has to figure out, how to connect this light to her wearable computer. And also, as Michelle brought up earlier, how to program this wearable computer to tell that light to turn on at some point. And so, this is the programming that this is a child pre-programming their lily pad, but you can certainly reprogram it once it's sewn into the device. And now there's these new snap circuits as well. And so this is a child just kind of testing out the LED functions there. The programming up until this point has been difficult. That's why we've been working mostly with high schoolers and undergraduates especially, but now thanks to the folks over at ModKit, they're making this sort of graphical block sort of programming language that uses a lot of the drag and drop that we've been seeing in the Scratch project and in other projects that really make programming easy enough for some of our second graders to get involved in designing their own e-textiles. And so this is really, really kind of fun. This is Alpha ModKit, but they're coming out with a new release this fall to make it even more powerful for some of the electronic textile designs. And then one of the things that's kind of become out of our NSF work with Leah and Yasmin and Mike Eisenberg is around creating an online e-textile community. And this is really the first of its kind, is that e-textile folks have had to go and be part of other kind of maker spaces and places to sort of put their materials, but this is actually the first community to bring together e-textile work. And so what's really fun about it is that we have the kids from our workshops participating, but we also have just people, DIY enthusiasts. So that Nitty know-it-all bag that you see up there came out of one of our workshops, but somebody else just in the online community decided to create one and upload it to this space. So there's a mix of age ranges, of expertise, of first e-textile projects and more e-textile projects. And so you can visit this at lilypond.mit.edu and really see some of the projects that the kids have been doing. And more recently, you'll see some video and other things that are embedded in these projects. And so this is some of what you'll see at that website. You'll see a range of things that the kids have been creating, you know, integrating the e-textile with their projects. And so you can see here some of these bracelets that we've been doing in our workshops, where the kids actually, they program the word that you can see. So you can see the little girl up in the top left-hand corner here. She's got a 5 LED spread, but when you turn the lights down low and she moves her wrist pretty quickly, you can see that it says sage. So your eye will kind of connect those things together. You can see another girl right here in the middle. She's created a t-shirt, and she intends to be a fashion designer. And so you can see she took this Hanes t-shirt and sort of used a lot of what she knows about kind of ripping up that t-shirt to create her own creation there. And she, you know, really did a nice job kind of thinking about integrating the lily pad into her designs. And an array of other work that the kids have been doing, including this Michael Jackson glove back when he had passed away, so that it says Thriller when you move it as well. Some of the other things that we've been doing is sort of looking at educational applications for e-textiles and working to think about how could we integrate these things for not just the making experience, but also the doing experience. And so as this is a group of kindergarten and first grade students that are working here with BSIM, and what they're doing is actually learning about the complexity of bees collecting nectar. But what we were able to do is use the e-textile pieces as a prototype and build these electronically enhanced puppets so that the kids can go around and collect some nectar and bring it back to the hive. And they learn about some of the constraints of the system, that bees don't have an unlimited amount of energy, that they need to return to the hive at certain key points and so on. And this was really fun, and it was covered in Make magazine and won some awards on Instructables.com as well. So I just want to touch a little bit on sort of what youth have been learning in the process. So I've been focusing on sort of the physical computing aspect, and that's really what separates artists at a top level. And so you'll see at like RISD, at all these major institutions, that artists are actually taking classes in physical computing. And I've been sort of looking at, well, what does physical computing entail? What do we need to teach kids so that they can get introduced to physical computing early, so that they can be creating some of the works that professional artists like Hussein Chalayan and others are able to do with these materials. And I think this whole movement is quite broader than just e-textiles. It's really getting kids comfortable with working on and off the computer, of using programming, but also using electronics in very meaningful ways. And so there's kind of 3 aspects of this physical computing in the arts that are important. And some of it is around learning how to computer program toward creative ends, or creative computing. Some of it's around craftsmanship. And so you can see here how learning to sew and to craft and solder is very heavily wedded to the work. And a lot of it has to do with electronic construction in theory. And so how, you know, you'll see some of the kids really struggle with this idea of creating a single loop for the circuit, or how what role does a switch play in your circuit. And so so there's a lot of traditional kind of things that have been sort of the domain of robotics, and a lot of those toolkits that still come into play once we move into e-textiles, but it has the addition of really welcoming in a broader base of youth into the construction process. So this is one of the projects that the kids did that I'm going to go into a little bit more depth on here. And this is Amber and Antoine's Reddit robot. And so for those of you that are familiar with Reddit.com, it's an online community that shares kind of what's really new and popular online. And so you can go there and you can kind of see kind of what's been tweeted about, what's been most viewed, what are the hottest YouTube videos. All of those things will kind of be culminated right there and kind of given right to you. And Amber and Antoine are a little bit skeptical about this website, and they're convinced that it's making the world lazier. So, and so they're around the time that they're making this. This is when the Nyan cat internet meme was going off, and and they just felt like people were getting obsessed with this idea. So it's a little bit, obviously they're tuning into it as well. So it's a little bit tongue in cheek, but they're sort of making making fun of this, and their puppets here are intended. The one that Amber's holding is actually the Reddit robot, sort of the mascot of Reddit.com, and Reddit is sending out to the world these internet memes, and Antoine's robot is receiving them and kind of following his orders. So when the two work together, they actually light a light on, and so they had to work out, kind of how could one half of the circuit really be in this one puppet, and the other, has to hold the battery, and the one has to hold the LED. How are they mechanically going to make that happen? And so these little antlers that you see here is kind of what they worked out to make that happen. But in the process, they're learning about good craftsmanship. They explore a large amount of materials. They learn, kind of how to make a solid connection. They make several mistakes in the process that they're learning from. And so, we stepped back from this a little bit, and we were just looking at, well, certainly you can see cases of this happening, but can you see this happening consistently across a lot of the youth that are in our workshops? And so, to see whether they're learning about circuits, for example, we had to create some new assessments. A lot of the assessments in circuitry have to use the materials, and so typically it's a light bulb and a battery kinds of things. But here we sort of turn to the materials the kids were going to become familiar with, and you can see it's a small battery holder, a small LED, and a push button switch, and they're creating just a simple circuit here. And so you can see on the left-hand side really what that circuit layout should be. And so you're going to have to pay attention when the battery holder, the positive side of the battery holder needs to connect to the positive side of the LED, for example. You can also see here in the diagram that they're going to have to pay attention that that's securely fastened. And so if it's a weak connection, just like it would be in any other circuit, it's not going to light the LED. And then you can see the negative side of the LED goes to the switch, and then the switch back to the battery holder. And the switch can actually go anywhere in the circuit. And so you can see actually on the pre-test here, one of our kids that actually had a lot of circuitry background had made these kinds of things with traditional materials. It's this like spider web of things, and this actually would have not worked. It would have returned the energy back to the battery and probably shorted the battery in a few seconds' time. And so you can see a lot of lingering misconceptions that kind of come from the traditional materials. And Yasmin and I have been talking a lot about kind of how e-textiles with these wires that are exposed, a lot of the things that you take for granted in these normal toolkits start to question some of the assumptions and the understandings that kids have. And you can see after working the e-textiles that this becomes a real simple task to draw a simple circuit with these materials. And so this is the same child in their post-test. So we've been kind of collecting all of this information into a couple different volumes that are going to be coming soon, and many of the guests here are involved in these volumes in some way. And the first here is a book that's coming out that's a partnership between the National Writing Project, myself, Nicole Pinkert at Digital Youth Network, and Katie Salen at Institute of Play, and Melissa Grisolfi that's now relocated at Vanderbilt University. And so, as Christina was mentioning earlier, this volume is really about getting kids to understand systems thinking, but through the everyday materials in their world, and really positioning them as designers of these systems and not just participants in systems that are happening. So this volume is on short circuits. It's crafting with DIY electronics, and so a large part of this work has to do with e-textiles, but it also gets into electronics more generally as well. And so the book is sort of divided into sort of the big ideas of systems thinking, getting started with e-textiles and DIY electronics, and that contains a lot of the how-to knowledge, and we'll talk a lot about it, but there's so much that's embodied in the practice that is in that section of the book. How to tie knots, for example, how to teach your children how to run a running stitch, those kinds of things. And then there's a series of design challenges that get you deeper into some of the systems thinking content, and there's always a hands-on challenge around creating a thematic make as well. And then lastly, there's a bunch of learning resources for both the youth and the teachers or after-school coordinators. And so we imagine that this will get taken up in both after-school settings and in-school settings. And sort of a sister volume to this, Yasmin, Kafai, and Leah Buechley and Mike Eisenberg and I have been working to kind of pull together a lot of this information around e-textiles and education. And so it's really exciting, and Michelle's the series editor for this volume. And what's included inside this book is a range of e-textile construction kits. And so the LilyPad Arduino, for example, is just one of several commercial toolkits that are available now, and so it's really spawned a whole interest in so many different people to kind of create more commercialized toolkits that have different approaches to these similar kinds of ideas. And then section 2 is about learning and designing with e-textiles, and that's really a lot of the educational implementations that have gone on in my group and Yasmin's group and Mike and Leah as well. And then we also invited a few people that have been doing this work internationally to share some of the workshops that they've been doing and leading. And then we step back a bit in section 3 to really talk about the larger meaning of these e-textile cultures and communities. What does it actually mean to sort of bring in crafting into these traditional sort of circuitry landscapes, and how does that push on our notions of gender and different kinds of ways of constructing the larger field and landscape there. And throughout the volume, there's a bunch of illustrated vignettes from professional artists that have actually been using these materials to kind of be integrated into a knitting bag to give you the directions for knitting your next sweater. It could also be integrated into your dance performance costume so that the dancer can actually control the music. And so you'll see a lot of range of illustrative vignettes so you can start to imagine what these materials might take place. All right. Well, I'm going to pitch it back over for our kind of general discussion and chatting, but I'm sure we've got lots of questions for one another.
Yeah. No, that was absolutely fantastic, Kylie, and thank you so much for sharing your work and just the different ways in which that work is being applied in different kinds of maker communities and spaces, and really, I think, inviting us to think about the larger kinds of implications for this as a new mode of youth DIY culture, but also thinking about its connection to 21st century literacies, new literacies, and how this work might help all of us think more creatively about the interventions that we desire to make in these various spaces. So one of the things that we like to do at this point is to open it up to our Google Hangout members, and if you have any initial reactions, thoughts, observations, questions, other examples or ideas or issues that you would like to raise, in part in response to Kylie's presentation, this might be a great time to do that. And so I'd like to open it up to the Google Plus Hangout and to see what's on your mind and maybe how some of your work connects to and illustrates some of what Kylie shared with us.
Well, this is Christina. I just wanted to sort of go back to the Amber and Antoine.
Oh, we lost her, Craig.
Okay, so I think we may have lost her, so she'll hopefully find her way back in. I think she's just coming back in now, as a matter of fact. Are you back with us, Christina?
I am. Sorry about that.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Oh, should I just keep going? Okay.
Yes, please do.
Well, I just was thinking about the Amber and Antoine Reddit robot and what an exciting example of that is from a sort of reading, writing framework, you know, this way that the kids are responding to, I guess, popular culture and what's happening online, and then kind of creating these characters that describe and speak back to that and react and respond to that. It just seems like one of those really beautiful examples of the power of this work. So I just wanted to, I hadn't seen that particular example before, but there's many examples like that that I think just speak to what is so powerful about this work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I know that a number of you in the Hangout are not only thinking about and theorizing about this kind of work, but perhaps just as importantly, you're out there kind of in the community, embedded in different spaces, really trying to provide and afford opportunities for young people to have these kinds of experiences and take on these kinds of identities. And I know, Sam, the work that you're doing through the High, Yasmin, some of the work that you're doing in Philadelphia and beyond might also be just some good ways of connecting to and further sort of illustrating, the impact and influence of these kinds of opportunities in young people's lives.
Yeah, I can just share some of the things that has really gotten us excited about this work in the Hive Learning Networks. So MacArthur has really been leading in the digital media and learning space and has recognized that if you're going to really create sustained and rich opportunities for youth, you need to have a platform where that learning takes place. And that or another way to describe it really is a laboratory in which we are experimenting with these different approaches to youth engagement in a digitally enabled way. And the Hive Learning Networks in New York and Chicago are really examples of those kinds of learning laboratories. And so this approach to learning connected to the theme of creative production and fashion that overlaps with technology is really exciting to us for a number of reasons, including that it provides a platform for creative self-expression for youth, that it takes them out of the domain that they might be used to working in, whether that domain begins in a tech space or in a fashion space. It creates an opportunity for them to cross boundaries in a really not just interdisciplinary way, but in the way they describe it at the MIT Media Lab, where Leah Buechley works, in a real anti-disciplinary way. And that's really quite exciting. But I also think this creates an opportunity to challenge youth, not just to create, but also to be able to voice the inspiration in their creations. So in the Hive Fashion program, which is an initiative beginning in the Hive Learning Networks, for example, we started our work in this area not to begin in a very skill-dependent way where we're expecting kids to come to the table with lots of skills. Instead, we were to really activate their interest in a way connected to fashion that might lead us in directions that link up with the work that Kylie and others are doing. And so, for example, if you look at hivefashion.tumblr.com, you'll see some images from an event that we called a fashion dump, the goal of which was to challenge kids not just to create, but to articulate the ideas that drive their creative expression. So we dumped a bunch of clothes on the floor, they picked some up and used them on the body and on dress forms to style garments in creative ways that communicate their own ideas. And being able to take that same sort of activity and now move it in a direction that youth and youth program providers might not expect it to go, that is directly in the direction of technology and building proficiency in that area, is really exciting, and just again opens expands the horizons of what's possible. And I think that's one of the great things about this work that happens largely in out-of-school spaces, and we're excited to see how it might connect, perhaps through digital badges, to in-school spaces as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, you know, I like what you said there, Sam, about kind of, different pathways into the work, and it ends up being really widely appealing to youth. I think a lot of questions that I get from people is, will this appeal to the boys? You know, will this be something, you know, if I'm in a classroom, will this appeal to a broad swath of people that are in my classroom? And I think the answer is yes, but could you speak to that a little bit about who's been excited by your workshops?
Yeah, so we're just beginning the funding of the program, which means that the chunk of the programs that are going to be offered to youth are being offered by members of the Hive who are going to receive funds that we're just going to announce tomorrow and into next week. So much of our program development has yet to begin, but for the program development that we've done so far, I think you're right that there are a variety of pathways into this. So for some folks, it's going to be fashion and style, that they are people who, fashionistas who live and breathe interest in that topic. But I think for other students, it's really about having a platform for self-expression and for gaining skills. I think for example, in U-Media, a teen collaboration space in Chicago where this fashion dump I mentioned was hosted, there are a number of students who come in who hang out, mess around, and some who really want to go deeper and really geek out in creative production in a quite agnostic way. Like, whatever the platform, I want to dig deeper. And so we've found in that particular event for the fashion dump that there's quite a range of youth involvement, racially, gender. It was a very mixed group, and all of them felt that they had something to say and therefore had something to do in this space that gave them a platform to say something in a creative way.
Sorry, I always manage to do that at least once. Forget to press the mute button. Anyway, Yasmin, I was noting that I think you are certainly involved in this work as well. Some collaborations with Kylie and beyond, and thought maybe you might want to share how some of your work intersects with many of the themes that have been identified here.
Well, I think a number of really important points about appealing to a broad range of interests, connecting across different media have already been mentioned, and the electronic textiles mentioned to do this very successfully. I mean, I work a lot at the end of kind of computer science education, which has been a very heavily kind of male-dominated area, and a lot of kids are really not interested. They think, I mean, this is not for them, this is too high-tech. And I think what we have found, I mean, in the last few years, that working with the LilyPad Arduino really opens up computing to a broader group of kids who we did not see them self-connected to anything at this kind of high end of technology, but I think that connects very well with the kind of creative production angle we're all interested in terms of creating 21st century literacy and broadening participation. And the LilyPad Arduino, as Leah also noted, has kind of created this whole new community because it's functionally equivalent to the Arduino community, which happens just to be more interested in making robots, laser printer, and a whole host of other nifty stuff. But with the LilyPad Arduino, with electronic textiles, you can do many of the same things. Technologically very complex, but they have this kind of really great artistic, aesthetic component, which I think is often missing in our connections in schooling and out of schooling in general. I think it's really devalued on how we think about learning, this kind of component on how things are aesthetically pleasing and personally relevant. And I think many of the examples which Kylie showcased with the robots with the glows kind of showcase this kind of connection between technology and personal interest in community, where the electronic textiles kind of create a missing and very visible link.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Michelle, I know your work and some of your interests have to do with how we map out and think about the emergence of new forms of literacy. And I wonder if you have any thoughts or reflections on how the work that Kylie is doing and that others here are supporting and participating as well. How does this begin to compel educators, researchers, teachers to think about literacy in ways that perhaps we haven't thought about?
Well, certainly, thanks, Craig. And certainly from my own perspective in terms of new literacies, what I see in Kylie's project and what the work Yasmin is doing and Sam as well is a really nice, rich context in which young people can make meaning through the things that they do and the resources they draw on and that kind of thing. So in my work with Colin Lancashire, we make a distinction between the new technical stuff and the new ethos stuff. And the new technical stuff refers to the nitty-gritty, being able to work the software, being able to do the programming and all of that kind of thing. And this is typically the level that a lot of schools tend to leave their engagement with digital technologies at, whether it's learning to word process or teaching kids how to make, put images to music and that kind of thing. But the new ethos stuff is really very much along the lines of what Yasmin was just talking about in terms of it's collaborative, you participate in something. The access to participation is really quite affordable and available and those sorts of things. And it's also about having access very much to communities where you can have support. And as Kylie talked about in her presentation, it's a lovely, lovely mix of experts and novices. The whole distinction between having to be a credentialed expert or a newbie and that kind of thing really fades away as you become involved in this particular kind of practice. And when we talk about new literacies from a sociocultural perspective, we also talk about social practice. And I think this is a really lovely dimension of the e-textiles projects in the way that the kids are absolutely immersed as doers and makers and beers within this particular space where they are programmers, where they are designers. And it's not just being talked about, but they're actually even, what Jim G calls performance before competence. They're jumping in before they fully understand what's going on. I think this has enormous implications to how we understand literacy. And I've had a lovely experience of reading an advanced copy of Kylie's book and Yasmin's book and seeing the language that the kids use as they're talking and collaborating across problem solving and working things out and having to sort out the programming modules that they're using in ModKit or those sorts of things. And really using the language of designers, the language of programmers, and taking on those identities in meaningful sorts of ways. It's not pretend, none of it's pretend or as if, but it's certainly skills and language and understandings that are recognized outside school and valued outside of school for all sorts of, in the design community, in the programming community, and that kind of thing.
No, that's absolutely well put, Michelle, and thank you so much for those insights. So one of the things that I know that the Google Plus Hangout that's gathered here today is really interested in, and that is sort of application of these kinds of practices, and how do you design environments and opportunities that are scaffolded in such a way as to afford young learners the ability to develop these literacies, to become makers, doers, beers, Michelle, as you were just alluding to. And this is related not only to your interest, but I think it's an interest that many others share as well, who are watching us and who are very much invested in and passionate about these issues. We actually have a question from the live stream related to this that I'd like to share with the group and just get your response. And it is from Buffy Hamilton, a well-known librarian and a friend of the DML community. And Buffy asked this question: what advice do you have for teachers and librarians who want to integrate high-tech textile design into their classrooms and programming? Would anyone like to think about that question or share some reflections and thoughts? Because I think a lot of what we tend to see with this type of work is that it's made available in after school places. It's a great enrichment activity in the summer for kids who may have very little access to other kinds of opportunities. But there is and will come a time, if not now, where we should be having a conversation about how do we integrate these kinds of literacies and opportunities into both in-school and out-of-school learning environments that may or may not be connected to schools, but to libraries and to other kinds of resources and organizations that are trying to provide access and opportunities for kids to develop these kinds of identities and practices and participate in these communities. But there's certainly challenges that we should at least be aware of and mindful of, and perhaps you can talk about how some of those challenges relate to the work that you've been exploring.
Yeah, I think a couple things that I think about, because we have been doing this with the Boys and Girls Club. Our local library has contacted us to make that kind of programming available. We've been working with some of the museums, and there's a couple sort of lessons learned. I think one of the things is we move off screen into physical and kinds of materials, is that we need to develop an infrastructure for storing those materials, for purchasing those materials, and those kinds of things. And so, some very simple kind of guidelines I would say is that you want to think about the physical space. Pieces that the kids will need access to, like the conductive thread and those types of materials. And so, so you can kind of create sort of a small box of materials, but you also need a place to store, and Sam's talking about all of that clothing that might have been donated, or you could pick up at the local Salvation Army. You can get t-shirts for $1 at some of these places. Those are all great to have, but what do you do with the extras? How do you size appropriately for a large group? How do you teach them how to use material to create their own t-shirt? And so there's a lot of thinking about how to store the physicalness of those kinds of things. And having a space to do that, I think, is one part of it. The other part is just having access to the materials isn't enough, and you need that kind of training and thoughtful educator kind of leading these types of things. So participating in a workshop. Yasmin hasn't talked a lot about the e-textile circles that she's starting, but so much of the crafting tradition is actually taught from one person to another, and so it's really important that your educators and your workshop leaders actually take part in participating in some of these kinds of things. And so there's lots of opportunities to do that, I think, in this work, but garnering some sort of crafting knowledge. Anyone that you have locally that would have that crafting knowledge would be actually a really great person to sort of bring in to help with the e-textiles work. Because actually some of our best e-textiles people weren't the people that had a background in robotics. It actually turned out it's the people that have a background in crafting, in sewing, that really kind of do a lot of this really integrative work that is really central to e-textiles. And so you might want to look for somebody that has that kind of expertise, but then also how do you get them comfortable with the technology pieces and to program? And I think that it's all possible, and that's certainly why we're putting the materials together now. Mm-hmm. Chris, do you want to add to that? Because certainly we've been thinking about and training teachers and educators through your work, and Yasmin as well.
Yeah, I would say that the one thing that I would just add is, and I think you really said this, it's sort of the community and the group knowledge. So at the Writing Project, we're supporting teachers in coming together to work on this work together, and then also with students. I'm just thinking about that example that Laura Lee Stroud, a teacher from Central Texas Writing Project, wrote in the curriculum that's upcoming, and she talks about how working with the students, one of the students was sort of disengaged and then realized suddenly that actually, wait, she does know how to sew. She learned how to sew by helping her mother at the salon put in hair extensions, and then she became a leader in sort of helping facilitate the other students in learning how to sew for the first time. So it is that sort of collective and collaborative spirit that I think you see that is in the tradition of crafting, that we've been trying to support communities and teachers and sort of engaging together in that way too.
Should I?
Yes.
I think another way, I know we all who have been kind of working in the area of e-textiles been struggling with, is to find a language to kind of describe, the learning, because we all know that the projects look very compelling, but in the long run, we have to kind of, provide also documentation and ways to kind of capture what actually is being learned beyond, the crafting and making something, and how does this connect. And I think Kylie's work around the short circuits, kind of connecting it to system theory, system thinking, I think is one good way, which kind of goes beyond the traditional ways of crafting and technology and connects us to larger issues. I've kind of been focusing more on the computer science programming angle. So what are kind of some of the key ideas of computing which kids actually engage in when they make these things, thinking about control flow and connection. And I think those are all important gateways to join the larger conversation, to make these materials appealable and valid and important, and also to kind of showcase that it's, beyond, there's serious fun and learning involved when you make those things.
I just wanted to, I'm sorry.
No, you go.
Well, just building on what Yasmin said, I think also, and Sam said this too, that aspect of storytelling that can be bedded into these projects, and this sort of narrative piece that can be part of a larger way of communicating and sharing and responding to, I think is another part of what Yasmin was talking about, connecting to these bigger systems and these ways of working together.
And I was just going to comment on how it's not surprising that a lot of this work is happening outside school, in these outer school spaces that don't have to have the standardized testing and answer to certain kinds of imposed curriculum and that kind of thing, and that focusing on whether it's a systems thinking and getting kids to understand how systems operate, or looking at the programming language, there's ways of certainly leveraging administrations to think beyond, oh, it's a monster whose eyes light up kind of thing, to looking at, oh, there is some real value to be had out of this in our computer science classes, our mathematics classes, and that kind of thing. And I think, Yasmin's very right about helping teachers find a language to talk about advocating for these hands-on sorts of projects in their classrooms as well.
Yeah, I was struck by, Kylie had an opportunity before we began today to look at, some of your work, and was really intrigued by the blog that you, Michael Eisenberg, and others have, collaborate on. And there were a series of posts related primarily to some of the gender implications associated with this work. And in particular, thinking about the cultural norms and the kinds of historical legacies related to how children are socialized into play and exploration and experimentation, and how those processes are very much shaped by gender norms and gender expectations. And so I wonder, this is a question to you and others as well, how does this work? And as we begin to think about democratizing these kinds of spaces, opening up wider opportunities for a more diverse community of young people to experience these kinds of practices and what they potentially mean in terms of learner identities, a sense of efficacy, so forth and so on. How does the work that you're doing, or the work that you are aware of, really begin to push back against some of those norms and expectations, and really defy some of the gender norms and cultural practices that have long sort of restricted, in particular, young girls' opportunity to experience themselves as makers, doers, and designers?
Absolutely. I think this does put it on its head, and it's a contentious space. When we went in to do a workshop a while back, and at the Indiana Women in Computing conference around e-textiles, there was a lot of women that were really welcoming to this, and then there was actually a subset of women that said, wait, if we really want to get women into computing, what we should be doing is getting them into robotics. So that's really, the kinds of knowledge and the kinds of valued kinds of practices that they need to know to be able to compete with their white male counterparts. And so you can see that it kind of goes both ways, you know. So when you sort of invite sewing into this tradition and traditional sort of women's craftsmanship, is you are pulling on a long sort of legacy and history and sort of identity notions to sort of welcome in a new generation of you know, engineers and designers into this practice. But you also are kind of upsetting some of those traditional norms and ideas. And certainly I think one of the pieces that really speaks to how this is upsetting those ideas is Leah had done this really nice piece on lily pad in the wild, and what she had done is she had hired Mechanical Turk to go in and look at who had been the creators of the typical Arduino work, which is sort of is a family of Arduino materials for robotics, and the lily pad's actually the only one that integrates with crafting materials. And so what they did was they looked at who is using these Arduino products to create robots, to create the kinds of things that you'll see frequently in Make Magazine or in Instructables.com, and then also who is behind the LilyPad work. And so a Mechanical Turk tracked down, I think it was a couple hundred different projects, both with the typical Arduino and then also with the LilyPad Arduino, and it was something like 60% of the makers behind the LilyPad Arduino were females, but only about 1% of the makers that were behind the Arduino robotics were female. And so you can kind of see Leah's thesis is really, you change the materials, you're going to really change and upset you know, who are the makers in this thing. Yasmin, do you want to add to that? That certainly ties to a lot of the work that you've been doing around gender.
Well, I think, you know, we saw that in the examples of the pictures you showed in the robots and in many of the workshop experiences that, I mean, much to our surprise, as many boys kind of join the e-textile workshops, we found, however, they prefer to talk about doing circuits and sewing, you know, kind of clearly establishing their preferences. But I think, you know, lo and behold, it turns out to be an activity which is appealing for different reasons for those audiences. So we not only have girls doing e-textiles, the boys and young men who participate can kind of craft and create their own projects as successfully. And I think in the process, they often very much actually struggle with these gender issues. I mean, I heard kind of boys saying, you know, I thought sewing was kind of a girl's sport when they were making e-textiles. And I think that is really a kind of telling comment that, you know, it kind of makes transparent these inherent struggles and norms we've kind of deeply embedded in the digital culture. And I see this actually as an additional equally be valuable learning outcome and goal of e-textiles, not just the kind of technical and academic components, but also becoming more aware what kind of surrounds the culture and frames our thinking and doing, and why we join certain groups and not others. And I think e-textiles are really fruitful territory for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we are coming near the end of our webinar session here, and would like to open it up for any final but quick notes or comments that any of our Google Plus Hangout members would like to share with us.
I just wanted to say, in response to Yasmin's point about trying to find a language that communicates the value of this, I think it really sits at a sweet spot in interest-driven youth engagement, and that's at the intersection of engagement and skill development. That's rare to find, and I think it's exciting potential of this work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and to that I would add, I know with the Connected Learning Research Network that one of our sort of more persistent conversations is, you know, how do we sort of document empirically evidence of not only connected learning and interest-driven learning, but outcomes and implications. And so those are very important points for us to consider. Okay. So let me go ahead and just make a couple of final notes before we sign off. For those of you who are watching, and those of you who are in the Hangout as well, please visit Kylie's webinar page on www.connectedlearning.tv later today, where there'll be a full recording of this webinar, as well as a list of the questions that were asked, a list of the resources that have been mentioned, and an archive of the live stream chat. We welcome you to continue today's conversation on that page, as well through our Twitter hashtag #ConnectedLearning. We'd also like to let everyone know that the Connected Learning Research Network has launched a call for proposals for a 2-year study on how youth are learning in connected learning environments. They're looking for 30 to 40 groups to participate, and the link for more information about that can be found in the live stream chat later today as well. And then finally, just a quick note about our next webinar session, which is Thursday, September 27th, 8 p.m. Pacific, 11 a.m. Eastern Time. And that webinar will be with a teacher, Jabiz Rizdeno, who will be talking about empowering students' voices through social media. So we look forward to that webinar. And again, for those of you who want to find out more about what happened today or in previous webinars, feel free to go to connectedlearning.tv where we've archived each of these sessions. I want to say thank you again to Kylie and our Google Plus Hangout members for a very stimulating conversation. I've taken several notes that I'd like to follow up on as I look to learn more about these kinds of spaces and opportunities as well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.